I'm Mr. Snell, and I'm joined on this panel by Mr. Reed and Mrs. Miller. And Garrett has been my senior assistant this year in New Testament class. It's been a joy and honor to have him there, and I'm excited for what he has to share with you guys today. Let's get started and pray. Thank you so much, Lord, for this day and for the chance to be here with these people, to come and honor and listen to Garrett. I pray that you would give him a clear mind and clear thoughts as he expresses his thesis today, and for his responses in the panel discussion. Be with him and give him strength and boldness. We pray these things in your name. Amen.
Is it on? Okay. I have lived in a... Oh, wait, I gotta wait for you to sit down, don't I? Sorry, I'm ready to go. I have lived in a Christian household my entire life, attended a Christian school, and grown up with Christian friends. I was raised by Christian parents and grandparents and was constantly surrounded by Christian influences. I had no question about the blessings around me and was comfortable growing up in this Christian walk. Living this way was so easy. It was the only idea of reality that I had for the first years of my early and immature life. It felt almost monotonous, like I was making the same decisions every day and enjoying every moment of it. You could say I've grown up in the perfect definition of a Christian bubble. As I grew older, however, I began to interact with people who were not like me. They believed in different things and lived differently than I did. This became especially apparent when I began to play travel sports. Seeing these people smoke, curse, or drink at such an early age left a lasting impact on my life. Why would these people participate in such things and not think twice about it or feel any guilt? How could their parents not know about their activities? And how could they do this full of enjoyment repeatedly, tournament after tournament? However, I did not question these new people's beliefs for fear that they would see me in a different way because of our differences. After taking apologetics with Mr. Custer and going over proper ways to share the gospel with others, it left me wondering, how do I share God's truth without giving up my beliefs and becoming like the world that I see around me? I saw this not only among friends, but also among family members. There's one specific family member who was a solid believer, but walked away from the Lord after several disappointments, which became normal in his life. Seeing this family member publicly change his Christian beliefs impacted me. My life changed and my mindset experienced a drastic shift. I began to question some of my own personal beliefs after hearing what he said and seeing how he lived. This was the first time in my life that I genuinely interacted with someone whose beliefs were radically different from my own. Since this moment, I've questioned if it really matters if I share the truth of the gospel to someone who I assume will just not listen. Searching for the answers to these questions has been a journey. Someone who has helped me navigate some of these ideas is the pastor of ministry and evangelism at First Baptist Church of Odessa, James McCrary. During our interview, I asked him the question, how do we live in this world, share with others, and not abandon the truth ourselves? He responded with, you must first love them where they are. People do not need you to tell them that they are wrong. They already know that they are wrong. They need somebody to help them and help them out of that sin. Someone to show them and tell them that I love you. And I love you too much to let you sit here and struggle with where you are. He went on to say that you must make it apparent that you hate the sin and love the sinner. He's saying here that we must portray the point that you love them, you care for them, and you want to walk hand in hand with them. C.S. Lewis also shares some of the same ideas in Mere Christianity, where he says, no man knows how bad he is till he has tried very hard to be good. You must share God's truth the kindest way in an attempt to not cause strife with those who are struggling. But why share? Why does it matter if the person you are sharing with does not want to hear you? We live in a world where if you share your thoughts, you're seen as discriminating to others, racist, or any other negative or derogative label that this world can put on you. The world views us as a group of hypocrites who believe in a fairy tale story with a fairy tale ending. We are seen as people who can easily offend those around us who do not believe because we are challenging what they believe in. But if you're constantly going to be hammered for what you believe in, then is it really worth it to share? You should not have to take this constant beating just to talk to someone who is not going to listen to you anyway. The world will just tell you it's a waste of your strength. Move on from this path and do something different. It's a waste of your time anyways. Not only is it hard, but you're also going to be making enemies along the way, and no one wants to be looking over their shoulder. Besides, it is a much easier path just to let everyone believe what they want to believe and live how they want to live without any conflict or arguing. Just let everyone walk their own path and find out who they genuinely believe in for themselves without throwing this man named Jesus into their equation. Who wouldn't want to live in a world like this? But we are not promised as believers to walk this easy path. Take Paul, for example, who throughout his Christian walk was constantly persecuted, abused, and beaten to within the last breath of his life on more than one occasion. Even through these trials, he continues to share through his jailings and his tribulations. This year in Mr. Schumann's class, Human Literature and Society, we read To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. In one scene, a man named Thomas has been accused of a crime that he did not commit. The charge of defending his case has fallen to Atticus Finch. Atticus is questioned by his daughter Scout for taking this case. She asks, "Atticus, are you going to win it?" When Atticus answers, "No, honey." Scout then responds, "Then why?" This is a question we all find ourselves asking. As Christians, we should proclaim because we are called to proclaim. So, what stops us from doing this? Why, when faced with this task, do so many of us freeze? The one thing that holds us back from sharing with others is fear. People are scared that when faced with a challenge or a question, they may not be able to answer it, and in turn, may look like a fool. But this is not a valid reason to not share. We must be always ready to give an account of our faith, because as Christians, we will always be seen as different in the eyes of this world. We are put up on a pedestal and watched every waking hour until we finally slip up. And the minute we slip up is the time when we must be strongest in our faith. Just because you cannot answer a question or struggle through a conversation does not mean you should shrink away from the challenge. You must understand that God wants you to live on the battlefield. He wants you to be tested. He wants you to have questions. He wants your trials, and he wants your tribulations and questions, because he knows with this comes the strengthening of your faith. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, "No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it." As believers, we have questions, and if we always look for an absolute answer to a solution, we will never move forward or grow in our faith. Even the great John the Baptist had questions for Jesus while he was in a prison cell. We see this play out in Matthew 11:2, which says, "Now when John heard in prison about the deeds of the Christ, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, 'Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another?'" Your questions are not bigger than God, and he is not afraid of your questions. He wants to hear your questions. We must understand that even in these questions, God is still good and God is still sovereign. But this statement then begs the question, how do we live in the world and not fall and become of the world? While it is important for us to be around others of different beliefs, it is just as important for us to remember where we come from. We cannot afford to forget our roots in our Christian faith. If we let those around us begin to shape our thoughts and actions, then we will begin to fall away from our faith. To avoid this, we need to understand how close we are to God and how strong our faith really is. For my senior thesis, I read the book Christians in a Cancel Culture by Joe Dallas. This book tries to answer the question that we as believers may face throughout our time sharing with others. Mr. Dallas asked the question, how do we stand? How do we only articulate the biblical view on today's controversies, but also defend that view against serious, false, but also widely believed accusations? He goes on to answer by saying, "Do not adjust the moral or spiritual instructions that you have been given by those of the surrounding world, and do not let the surrounding world keep you from living and teaching the moral and spiritual instructions that you have been given." Dallas is right in saying this. We should not let the things that we know in the Bible be contorted by others. If we let society or culture define what we know in the Bible as true, then we lose our fundamental beliefs. We cannot let our ethics or moral lessons become based in our society, because then we become led astray. 1 John 2:15 says, "Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them." We must be on guard and also remember what 1 Corinthians 15:33 says. "Do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals." To live in this world and yet proclaim what God's word says, we must stand firm in our convictions and be strong in our faith. We must remember that it is good to dine with sinners, just as Jesus did, but we cannot forget our roots and our Christian convictions. We must be willing to not only bring people to Jesus, but also bring Jesus to people, as Paul illustrates in 1 Corinthians 9:19, which says, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them." That is not to say that we will never be faced with this kind of challenge in our lives. We must be ready and well equipped for when the time arises and we are tested. Mr. Custer prays for us every day that we may be ready and strong in the face of the challenge. He tells us that as graduating seniors, we will come to a point where we enter college and a professor or a student challenges our beliefs and we may leave confused about what we have just heard. Ephesians 6:18 through 20 says, "Praying at all times in the Spirit, with all prayer and supplication. To that end, keep alert, with all perseverance, making supplication for all the saints, and also for me, that the words may be given to me in opening my mouth boldly to proclaim the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, that I may declare boldly as I ought to speak." We should live and interact with others because not only are we called to be the hands and feet of Jesus, but it also strengthens our relationship with God. As students at MCA, we have had the privilege of learning and growing up in a somewhat insulated environment. However, as we become adults, we will be faced with the challenge of embracing and being around non-believers, either in our college classes, our jobs, or the new careers that we begin. Now return with me back to Atticus and Scout's conversation that I referenced earlier from To Kill a Mockingbird, where Scout asked Atticus why he would take the trial, even if he knew he would lose. Atticus answered, "Simply because we were licked 100 years before we started is no reason for us to not try to win." Atticus had it figured out all along. He knew why he would share this case, and that purpose drove him onward. He was not only trying to show that Thomas was innocent of any crimes, but also trying to show others about the example and importance of courage, integrity, and following your convictions. Now ask yourselves that very same question Scout asks Atticus. Are you going to win? Would your answer be the same? Would you be ready to boldly proclaim God's truth with others? I challenge you to thoughtfully consider this so that you are prepared when the opportunity arises to share the gospel. Thank you.
Congratulations, Garrett. Very proud of you.
Thank you.
Can you tell the audience how nervous you were for this oral?
Not really all that nervous, just really excited to get started.
Garrett has this interesting thing where he doesn't get nervous for anything, including basketball games. Just excitement. I think that's awesome, Garrett. What are your plans for next year?
I plan on attending Texas A&M and studying sports management.
Great. What are some of the strategies that you maybe have been thinking of for as you get to A&M and you want to stay walking with the Lord? Have you begun to think about that yet?
So, just what I have the special thing of just being around like a bunch of other students who will be at A&M. So I'll still have like a really good group of core Christians that I can always go back to, even if I don't see them on a regular basis. But like, I think something that I've thought of is just remembering like the roots and the things that I've been taught here, and just remembering the fundamental beliefs that I've been like raised on, either at this school or at home.
So I'm curious about this topic for you. We've talked about this over the course of the year in our meetings, but when did you become so passionate about this subject? Was it something that happened over the course of time, or did God kind of illuminate it for you kind of in one certain moment?
I mean, for a while, like, I didn't know what I really wanted to write on. Like, my junior year, if you asked me, I'd have no clue. I think just over the summer, when I began to like really think about it, and like something that I like to do is like I like to share with others, and I like to like indulge into like people's lives and like become really personal with them. So I just thought like this may be a good way to go about that, or talk about something like this.
Good. Is this revelation something that you think is unique to you, or have you had conversations with classmates who are also interacting with people who may not believe in Jesus? Is it something that you've talked about with other friends in your grade?
So I don't really think it's just personal to me. Like, I think Callie's oral touches on this a lot. Just like in the proper way of like honest communication with others. And I think Ryan's as well kind of talks about that, just like how you have a loving conversation with someone. So I don't think it's something that's just personal to me, but it is something like I've talked with my parents about and other classmates a little.
That's awesome. You talk about being rejected for speaking truth. Has this happened to you?
Not like when it comes to sharing the gospel specifically, but like not like in that sense yet. Granted, I haven't really had a great view of the outside world yet because I'm still here. But just like just in general of just like hanging out with people who like don't go to the school or like seeing like how they act. It's like you try to intervene sometimes and they just don't listen. Like they'll like nod their head and say okay, but they just keep going about it. So yeah, I mean I have tried, but like not in the sense of like sharing the gospel like at that rate.
Okay. Yeah, speaking of sharing the gospel, what do you think is more important in sharing the gospel? Do you think it's physically speaking truth with words, or do you think it's expressing a Christ-likeness through your actions?
So, I think for me, I think it's through your actions, and the way I say that is because I always think of like Caedmon's brother, Conrad Eccles. He was someone that just like really impacted my life because like he like had all the character traits of like a servant leader, and he just like really embodied like a Christ-like attitude and just being like Christ in his everyday life, just through his actions. And it was like we never like talked about the gospel or anything, but he just like through his actions you could tell like that's a godly man who walks hand in hand with Jesus and he knows where his priorities are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really good, especially you being younger. But I'm curious, if you're a believer and you're going to go off to college and meet people who aren't believers, do you think that simply having Christ-like actions is enough to share the gospel with them? Do you think that will give them an opportunity to trust in Jesus Christ as their Savior?
I think it can be a part of that. I think eventually you have to talk to them. It can't just be like you showing through your actions because they can just think, oh, you're just a really good person. They just don't know like your personal life or what your personal beliefs are. So I think eventually you have to be willing to talk and have an open conversation with them.
That's good. What's a proper response when you do share the gospel with them and you're rejected? I know you talk about Paul in your paper, but how do you take that? How do you handle that personally? Like we can read about Paul, but for Garrett Kelly, how do you handle that when you're rejected for sharing truth?
I think for me, it just comes back to this idea of like what Mr. Westfall led us to is just like anyone who can be saved will be saved. So it's like if there is someone who's just like going to reject you or not going to be willing to listen, then it's like you have to be willing to like take your battles, and just take your losses in those, because like there are going to be people who just like aren't willing to listen or just going to be in that way. So I think it's just understanding like what your wins are and where your losses are.
Yeah, that's good. Because ultimately God is responsible for someone choosing to believe in Him or not, and we're responsible for sharing. So I got the privilege to sit in Revelation class with you a little bit this year, which was a lot of fun. You mentioned in your paper something to the effect of a fairy tale story with a fairy tale ending. So how does knowing the ending help your perspective about sharing the gospel in the present?
So I think knowing the ending and like specifically back to Revelation, I think knowing the ending and like understanding like what first of all Revelations does say, like I think it can help like push you towards being more impactful with how you talk and like being more engaging, because I think like we all know that as believers like God's will works for the best of all of us, and just like I think just seeing the end can like help you drive others to bring others to the Lord in your sharing. Yeah.
As you get ready to go off to college, like we've said, you're going to meet a lot of people who are different than you. What do you think are some gifts or abilities or some loves and desires in life that God has uniquely given you that you can use to influence those people that you'll come into contact with?
So, for me personally, I'm a people pleaser. So just getting to know people and then like figuring out how they act as like people and like or as in their everyday life, and then something that like God has helped me with is just like just being willing to like have open conversation with people, like, and being willing to just like go up and just meet and greet and have small talk with people is something that like I found to be like something God has put in me. And then just the ability just to like not even through your words but just through your actions, people like notice that. So just like without your words, like people can like notice your actions and they'll be willing to like come up and ask you like why you act the way you act.
Yeah, and one thing I would encourage you with is not always waiting for that moment to happen. I think a lot of people might feel that inside, but maybe lack the boldness to ask, why are you different? And I think that's where being bold with your words as well helps paint a clear picture of the gospel for someone. Thank you. I'm going to pass the mic.
Hey, Garrett. Good job. It's so weird how calm you are. All right. I've been threatening you. Oh, there you go. First refill. So I've been threatening you all week on really tough questions. I don't think I got questions that are going to crack you, though. I do want to start out. So can you... This is going somewhere, I promise. Can you define wisdom? Or what would you define wisdom as?
Let's see. I think the best way I could think about it is like being able to discern what's right and wrong, and yeah, I think the best way I can think is like discernment, like being able to determine like what is right and wrong, like in the moment, and like what's best for you.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm stealing someone else's definition here. I think it was Patrick Payton who said it a while back, and it's just stuck with me on wisdom's kind of seeing things the way that God sees them, which is basically what you just said. So what role would you say wisdom plays in sharing the gospel?
I think for us as believers, the wisdom we have is knowing where we go after death. So I think just in that aspect, like we can impart wisdom on people just to like, I'm not saying use like Christianity as like a scare tactic or something, but like, I think since we can impart that wisdom on others just by like using like Jesus as the example as the perfect sacrifice who died for the sins of all, and just using that can be like us imparting wisdom because we have faith that we know where we're going after this, where non-believers don't.
What about like situationally? So sharing the gospel, does it look the same every time, all the time, every person, every situation?
So yeah, I don't think it looks the same for like everybody, or for like in any like in every situation. I think there's a different way to go about it because people are different. We're all built different. So I think it looks different for like different situations wherever you share.
How often should we share the gospel?
I feel like you should share it whenever you can, and just like I feel like the best way to say it is like share whenever you can, because like what I think about is like going back to like our New Testament class is just like every time I taught I really like giving like a little testimony or something like that, and that was kind of like my way of like sharing the gospel to others. So I think just like sharing as often as you can, just like if you see like someone who like may be willing to listen or someone who does have a different belief, I think sharing with someone who will listen or like or as often as you can is a good way to go about it.
Yeah, and I think like you're saying, it's not always the same thing all the time. So at one moment it might be you specifically, sharing, as most people would like say, the good news or whatever, very explicitly. It might be you picking up my kids at grammar school and hanging out in my office or whatever. That's sharing the gospel with my kids, right? And so, yeah, it changes. So what do you think for you mostly, what does sharing the gospel usually look like for you daily?
For me, daily, I think what it looks like is hanging out with underclassmen and just like being willing to like use my actions in that way is the way that I like to like share the gospel with others, and like being willing of like talking to like younger students like in our New Testament class or in any other class about that, like where they may be struggling in their walk, is something that I like to do a lot of.
Okay. Do you think that's going to change much next year?
Yeah, I think it'll definitely change just because I won't be a senior, first of all. So, like, I won't be the oldest kid in the room. So, I think that'll definitely change, but I think there's ways, I think you can still go about it that way. Like, people will still be, like, in need, and there'll be still people who, like, will need help in that area.
So, one of the things that I think is really special about MCA and is special if you look for it when you go off is this idea of community. So what role does community have in you being able to be the person you want to be going out and sharing the gospel?
So I think community makes you comfortable. Just because like you know these people and it feels like you have a second family just to share to, so it doesn't feel like it's anything different. It kind of just feels like second nature, at least how it does for me. And then I think like that changes, like especially when I go to college, because it won't be like that big community that I have here.
Okay, so how do you think you can find that now in college?
Again, thankfully I'm going with a big group of people that are going to A&M, but I think specifically like finding a good church home is a good place to start. Just finding people who have like the same beliefs as you and like that are around your same age, like a good Sunday school or whatever you call it, or young group.
So shifting a little bit, you mentioned church. Do you think there's a way that churches can improve when it comes to sharing the gospel? Do you think, and I mean, there's a lot of different churches, so I guess the church in general, is there, do you think there's ways that we as a church can better share the gospel to this world?
That's hard. I've only gone to like 2 churches my entire life. I feel like there's definitely a yes and no answer to this. I feel like the answer is like yes, just because like you can always do more missionary work, whether that be in your own town or somewhere else. So I feel like the answer is yes in that aspect. But granted, I've only lived here my entire life, so I haven't really got to see many other churches.
Well, then let's bring it a little bit closer to home. So MCA, right? Why, if we didn't need to hear this message, you should have picked a different topic, right? Mm-hmm. So obviously we need to hear it, that sharing the gospel is important. So how do you think MCA could maybe be better at sharing the gospel?
So I think we do a really good job at it, like through our classes, like through apologetics with Mr. Custer, and through Revelation with like Mr. Westfall, or like any other classes, like not only at your senior level, but like in your grade books classes or your Old Testament or Greek classes. I think you do that, like we do that as a really good job, but like it's a completely different life from in class to outside of it. So again, I think it comes back to that idea of community is like, just because you go to the school doesn't mean everyone's going to believe the exact same things as you. So it's like, I think having that like group of people that you can always come back to like continue to like share with others is a good way to go about it.
All right. I think you do a pretty good job of it, so I will pass it on.
Okay, Garrett, we have something in common. Can you guess what that commonality is that I'm thinking of?
Not at all.
Okay. I didn't think we're both twins.
Oh yeah, forgot about that one.
Okay. Yeah. So I agree. So what's the most annoying twin question that you get?
Why don't you still dress the same? That's probably the most common one we get. And then the other one is, how on earth are y'all twins?
Okay, do you get the one where if you stump your toe, if Clayton stumps his toe, do you feel it? Yeah, I got that one?
No.
Oh my God. I don't know how many times I've been asked that one. It's okay, so my twin sister and I grew up in a Christian home, like
Right.
you and Clayton, and lived at home all 5 years of college. And so after college, I was ready to leave. Okay, and she stayed in Jonesboro, and I left and went to this strange country called Texas. So after A&M, if God was to call one of you back to Midland and say one of you to California, which one you think would be more apt to go to that weird country of California?
He'd kill me if I said him, so me.
Okay, good. I was hoping you'd say that. All right, so you get called to California, and God said, would you be more like Jonah and say, no, I am not going to that, or to minister to those strange people? Or would you be more like Isaiah and say, here am I, Lord, send me?
So I think when I first got there, I would probably be more like Jonah, because I'd just be really apprehensive about it all, because I was a weird state. But I think once I found my boundaries or found my footing in there, and kind of just figured out where I was and what was going on. I feel like eventually I'd get comfortable enough to where I'd become more like Isaiah, but I think at first glance I'd be like, no, I'd probably be more like Jonah, just kind of be really apprehensive about it all.
Okay. Do you feel prepared to go to a foreign land, whether it's some other state or some other country?
I mean, I feel like I'm prepared, for now, yes, but I feel like there's always more to learn and always a better way to grow. So I feel like, yes, I am prepared, but again, I still want to grow and learn more.
So what prepared you? What do you think?
So what I would say is the biggest thing that prepared me was, other than maturity, is just going to this school and then taking apologetics, and just talking to Mr. Custer about these kind of things, and being able to talk to people who aren't believers has also helped, whether that be in Mr. Custer's classes or just outside of those. I think those really prepared me just to find good ways to communicate.
Okay, so so you talked about why do it, and if you're just going to get pushed back. So Casey is at Tech, and she's taken a class this semester on at Redeemer on sharing your faith. So once a week they'll go out to a park, or they'll go to a grocery store, they'll go somewhere and share the gospel. And hardly ever do they get someone placing their faith in Christ. Mm-hmm. Okay, so why, as you were saying, and you kind of, what's the benefit of doing that?
Of going out?
Mm-hmm.
I think the benefit of it all is you get to learn better ways to share. You can say, oh, okay, well, this day this didn't really work. Let's try a different way about it. Oh, this way this didn't work. Let's try something else. But I think it just can help you learn how to properly communicate to people. And I think it can help you grow in that aspect, even if people don't even if you don't bring someone to Christ, I think it can help you grow in your faith, and it can help you like grow when it comes to your sharing and your proclaiming.
Yeah, that's exactly what she has found, and she actually loves it. She, I guess she handles rejection better than I do. And then you came to this part where you said we live in a world where if you share your thoughts, you're seen as discriminating to others, racist, or any other negative label to the world. And the world views us as a group of hypocrites that believe in a fairy tale story with a fairy tale ending. And so I kind of thought about in John 15, he says, 15, 18, 25, it says, in the world, if the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you're not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. But all these things they will do to you for my name's sake, because they do not know him who sent me. So how does that help us? How does that passage help us with this?
I think it can just give us that assurance that like you're not the first person to be rejected or hated in this world because of what you say. And I think from that it can give you like a lot of hope, like a lot of like reassurance that like, oh hey, I'm not the first, I definitely won't be the last. And it can just give you like a lot of faith that like it happens.
In fact, we should expect to be rejected, right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things, keep your expectations low, so when something good actually happens, I think someone does respond.
I think in a lot of ways it can be that way, because we're not all John C. Maxwell or Graham, so like I think, it can be like that. Like we're supposed to keep our expectations pretty low in that area, because a lot of us are still pretty new to it. Like I'm pretty new to it, so I think it can be like just keeping your expectations low till something does happen.
All right, Garrett, let's go back to New Testament class. What's been your favorite part of senior assisting that this year?
Queso. My favorite part, other than queso.
You can't name like individual students.
I love you, Queso. I think my favorite part has definitely been just hearing everyone else like teach the classes. Because I mean, for me that was like the most nerve-wracking part when I took it, was teaching the class. But I think it's just really cool to see like and to hear what they have to say and like teach their own books. So that's probably my favorite part.
Which book did you teach on, and why did you choose that book this year?
Like when I like
for
my year or for this year?
No, for this year.
For this year, okay. I taught on James, and I taught on James mainly because I really wanted to, just because it was a book like during retreat that I found myself like reading a lot of, just like in the mornings before we did everything, or at night after we did something, and it was a book I found a lot of like assurance in that, with like a lot of life applications in it. So yeah, that was like the main reason I wanted to teach it.
That's great. I'm curious for your thoughts on, obviously this is a important topic to you about watching friends and loved ones kind of walk away from the Lord, who have placed their faith in Him at one point in time. Specifically for your age group, high school students going off to college, why do you think that's such a big problem, or why is that so prevalent?
I think a lot of it has to do with people get caught up in the wrong crowd, so they just start hanging with like the wrong group of individuals, and their like thoughts and what they believe like as true can be like contorted by others. And then I also think a lot of it has to do is like people a lot of times just believe what they believe because it's how they're raised. So it's like it's not what they inherently believe. They just kind of like, oh, I go to church, I go to Sunday school, and that's it, or whatever. Like they just believe what they believe because that's how they're raised. And then when they get off to college, they have like no fundamental like basis for their belief or anything. So it's like pretty much anything goes for them.
Yeah, so let's unpack that a little bit more, because in your paper you talked about, okay, in order to stay walking with the Lord, what I need to remember is I need to remember back to my Christian roots and what I was raised with. So, but if you are just thinking back to your roots and what you were raised with, do you think that's sufficient, or is that lacking something in the present?
Like, are you saying like this person, like, are they believers at this time?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think.
What's the problem with me just like always looking back on the way I was raised? What's it missing in the present?
I think it can like. I think that's a good place to start, like whenever you begin. But like, I think what it can be missing is just like you don't like really have grown on anything, so it's just like you're just repeating the same thing over and over again throughout your years. Like you don't like learn anything different. It's just like what you've learned like when you were 3, and you just continue that.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. I'm glad we got there together. So speaking of believers that are going to go off to college and then begin walking in their flesh and away from the Lord, I had a former student call me the other day and said, hey, my friend that I've known for a long time started making these kind of decisions, and they're not godly decisions. How do I handle that? What do I say to them? What do I do? What would you say in that situation if you're that friend and your buddy is walking away from the Lord?
I think what I would start with is just by asking questions, just like understanding like where they're coming from whenever they're starting to make these actions or thinking of these ideas. I think what I'd start with is just questions about it.
Yeah. I think that's a really hard situation. It's one that I hope you won't have to find yourself in, but I think it's one that could have a high likelihood of occurring as you continue to grow older and people make their own decisions on their own. So I wanted to touch on that with you.
All right, so you said that you grew up in a Christian home, kind of the whole, probably a lot in this room can kind of attest to that kind of upbringing of kind of being in a bit of in a Christian bubble. Do you think, and I wouldn't say that this happened with you, because as you talk about, sports was kind of your outlet where you kind of started touching the outside world, but do you think it's good or dangerous for parents to shelter their kids? And like, where do we draw that line on kind of for our kids being in the world but not of the world?
Good question.
I'm still trying to figure it out, so yeah, I'm asking you for advice here.
I think at a young age, I think it's good to like shelter. I don't like that word. I think at a young age, it's good to like sometimes like you shelter like your kids from some things like when they're just growing up. But I don't think like you should hide everything from them. Like because but I don't think you should like again like let them go figure it all out or whatever. Like I think it's okay for them to like grow and make mistakes and everything, but I don't think you can just let them like get so far off to where that's all they indulge in or whatever. It's hard, I think, to find that balance though, like where to draw that line in a lot of areas, because like a lot of it has to do with like trust in your kid that he or she will have like believe what you've said throughout all those years, and he or she will like stay strong in what you've said. I think that's a really, really hard line to just like draw in the sand there. Yeah.
What about personally? So for you and your brother, like with your parents, when there were these moments that the outside world was encroaching, or you had these questions, or there was, things that, you were confronted with, how did your relationship with you and your parents, how did that work? How did they help you with that?
So the way it worked for me mainly was just at a young age they really didn't hide too much from me. They would make it like very, very known that it was a bad thing and you shouldn't do it. So like seeing them do it, I always had it in the back of my mind like what my parents had said, like it's not something you should do. So I think the conversation with me is I would just talk with them, like I'd ask questions and learn more about it through them. And I think like just going at that aspect of just like talking with them, it helped me a lot, just like understand what was going on.
Yeah. And that one of the things that stuck out to me when you were talking is when you're saying, I don't understand how these guys on the baseball team or whatever, they're doing all these things and their parents don't know and stuff. That stuck out to me because that shows for you, your parents know what's going on and stuff. And so what advice would you give younger people in this room, or people of your age too, or older, when it comes to this stuff? What advice would you give to them on this idea of communication?
So I think first of all I'd say like don't follow like what the cultural norm says of just like letting them like go about it. Like I think, I'm not saying you should just like hammer them with your beliefs and everything, but I think just like a healthy way is like going and just talking to them about it, asking them like why they do what they do, and again just going back with, it's gonna explode. Again, just going back with like questions and everything, I think is a good way to go about it. Just like I don't think like you should like indulge in it, but like just asking questions about like what's happening.
All right, I got one more question. This one was interesting because earlier this year I learned, or I came across, I think it was like a Christianity Today article. I don't know where it was, but basically, so one of the phrases you had in your thesis paper, the hate the sin, love the sinner phrase, it was talking about how there's kind of a big controversy over that phrase, and that kind of blew my mind because I was like, oh, I've said that a million times and haven't really thought, why could that be controversial and stuff? And basically, some argue that that phrase causes us to, when we're using that, we're taking certain people or usually certain like bigger sins or whatever, and we're kind of putting them in the boat of the sinner camp. And so we're saying like, we love you, we just hate what you're doing or whatever, kind of thing. And so it causes some isolation when in fact, as like scripture tells us, and as I know you'd agree, we're all sinners, we all fall short, right? And so do you agree with that phrase can kind of be misunderstood or misused, or do you think it's just it's people choosing to kind of take it wrong? How do we, because I had never even thought of that until this year, but it's one of those things that apparently some people get really hurt over.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of times it can, the way I think about it is it just can be like misunderstood. But I can definitely see how it's misused. But man, that's something I haven't like put a whole lot of thought into because I haven't really heard that idea like until like just now. So, but yeah, I can definitely understand like how it's misused and misunderstood, but I don't really know if I can give like a really good answer at this point, just because I haven't really put too much thought about it or heard like too much like pullback on that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I hadn't either until this year, so we'll talk about it later.
Sure.
Okay, I'm glad you chose To Kill the Mockingbird, because that is my favorite book. but you said when Atticus answers no, and then why, and then he goes back and answers on the last page, simply because we were licked 100 years before we started. Just because we were licked 100 years before we started is no reason not to try to win. And then there's also a quote by Atticus in the book where it says, real courage is when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway and see it through no matter what. So, define winning in these. How would Atticus define winning? Is he winning?
Okay, so the way I think Atticus would define winning is by, I don't think he would openly say like winning. I think he'd say winning is for him like winning the trial, but I think in this instance like he would say that like winning is just proving a point, or just like putting an opinion out there, putting his thoughts out there for like others to hear, to like maybe understand or see a different side of it. But I don't think he would openly say that like that's like his ultimate goal is just to like win the trial. I think that is his goal in a lot of sense, but like I think in also another way it's just for people to see like in a different way like what he's trying to say, to like put his points out there.
Okay, we like to win, right? Mm-hmm. God kind of made us competitive. And so when it comes to sharing your faith, how do you know you've won?
I think winning, of course, is in this instance can be like bringing others to faith, but I think also like winning is just being like, use an analogy here. I think also winning can just be like just planting a seed in someone and just letting it grow. And I think just doing that repeatedly can also be seen as like taking a small victory.
Okay, yeah. When I think of winning, I think of Christ saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant." So I think the key word to that would be the faithful part. Okay, and then last thing that I kind of want to touch on is, so you said, you talked about being an example. Said we must always give an account of our faith because as Christian we will always be seen as different in the eyes of the world. So we are put on a pedestal and watched every waking hour until we finally slip up. Okay, first of all, think about it. Okay, during a day, what percentage of your day do you think of other people? So you're awake, say, I don't know, 12 hours of the day. So what percentage of that is spent thinking of yourself and thinking of somebody else?
I'd say majority is definitely thinking of myself. I don't know if I could put an exact percentage on how much I think of other people.
I don't really need an exact, but most people think of themselves, their day. Every now and then, someone's name might come up, and you'll have a thought toward that person. But most of the time, a percentage of our day, we're just spent on our job, our task, ourselves, what we're going to eat, where we're going to go, and so, are we really watched? Are people really watching and waiting for us to slip up?
I think people are definitely always watching. I think there definitely are people who are waiting for people to make a mistake. Maybe not always is the best way to put it, but I think there are people I think you could say Satan's always waiting for us to make a mistake, but I think people in general are always watching us as in our actions or in our deeds or how we act or talk around others. But I think when it comes to watching always, I think Satan is always watching us always to make a mistake.
But isn't
or to
that
be able to creep into our lives?
If you put me on a pedestal, isn't that a you problem?
What do you mean by a you problem? Like,
Well, why put someone on a pedestal?
oh, okay. Let's see if I can get this. I think we put people on a pedestal, in a lot of sense, just because we find a lot of like trust, or we find like a lot of faith in people, in a lot of ways. So I think in that instance, we put people up on a pedestal, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah. What's wrong with that?
So what's wrong with it is just like it won't last. Like, eventually people are going to fall, and eventually people are going to make a mistake or leave you upset about something.
Yeah, so ultimately, if you got someone, say, some mega church pastor, and there's, who's the one that, the Village that everyone's always quoting, and
Matt Chandler.
yeah, Matt Chandler. So he's probably on it, being watched carefully. So what if he has some big slip up, and what do you think is going to happen to a lot of people's faith?
They're all going to it's all going to crumble for them, and they're all going to like just look at him like as a fraud. And a lot of people are just going to become like really angry or disappointed at it, or at him.
Yeah. So ultimately, even though there's a lot of good and speaks a lot of truth, ultimately, who has to be on the pedestal?
It has to be Christ.
Yeah. And so should that, the fact that we could be put on a pedestal, should that keep us from serving Christ and sharing our gospel? Like the fear of that?
I don't think it should keep you from serving Christ, but I mean, I don't think it should keep you from serving Christ. I think you still should. But I mean, like, it's really hard for, like, if people do, like, if people are comfortable around you, it's really hard for people who, like, to not find faith in you, I think, in a lot of areas, or to not find trust in you. But I think you have to make it apparent that you need to make it apparent where your trust should lie, or where your faith should lie. And it can't lie in me or anybody else to be your end-all, be-all.
Exactly. Okay. Golly.
My turn?
Okay, question time for you.
All right. It's the same question for all y'all, so I came up with it 10 minutes before this. So, here we go. Who is someone that has been a spiritual mentor in your life, and how have he or she led you?
That's easy for me. For me, it was my grandma Helen. She grew up in a, like I said, in a very small farming community. Hardly ever left Clay County, yet she had the strongest faith of anyone I've ever met. And I've met a lot of strong believers. And she just lived a life of contentment. And every morning she woke up and said, "This is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it." And if she wasn't working out in her garden, then she had either the PTL club on, or no one even remembers that, or her Bible in her lap reading it. And so
Man, I had a bunch. Probably one of the bigger ones for me was his name's Vernon Berger, which is a hilarious last name. And I just remember when I was going to meet him, I was like, this guy's going to be weird. And he was kind of weird at times. But I think his wife taught here a little bit, and he was around here. And just he started a ministry where they have orphanages and stuff. And I just remember he was always willing to drop everything at any moment to have a conversation that needed to happen with me or anyone else. And I just remember watching him and thinking, like, this is such a weird life. Like, people have things to do, but he would stop everything. There were times where people would just be staying at his house, and I'd be like, that's weird, and everything. But again, for him, it wasn't, Christianity, the gospel, all that stuff isn't just a thing that you pencil in it. Sometimes it was, like you've been talking about, it was a lifestyle, and that really impacted me on just kind of looking at relationships, looking at the world, community, all that stuff, radically different than kind of the norm. So
I think that's a really good question, Garrett. There's a couple I could choose from, but I'm going to say a man named Randy Sims, who's familiar to the MCA family. He paid me money to say that. So I got to know Randy really well when I served at Worldview Academy leadership camps in the summers during college. The Millers got to go on one of those boondoggles with us around the country. But to see the way that Mr. Sims was a servant leader to the staff of the camp and to the students that came to camp, it's a relationship that we've kept up over the years, where we talk on the phone, and now we get to meet in person, thankfully, being back in Midland, and just hear wisdom about different stages of life. So college to early out of college to now married and now married with children. It's been a relationship that's really led me closer to the Lord and shown me what a deep, mature faith can look like. So, and speaking of that, a challenge that I would have for you as you go off to college is to seek out spiritual mentors. I'm sure you have some here in Midland, but to continue seeking out that wisdom from someone a little bit older who's traveled that road before will be very beneficial for you, and will be one of those strategies that helps keep you walking with the Lord through college and beyond.
Awesome.
Yep. All right, I'm going to let Mr. Reed pray, and we'll get you out of here.
You never know.
God, I thank you for Garrett. I thank you for his heart that he's shared here at MCA over the years, and he's just shared with us this afternoon. And I'm sure there's many more people he's going to be sharing that heart with from years to come. And I just thank you for the words he had for us. I just pray that you continue to strengthen him, that you continue to give him wisdom to find those moments to share your love with others, and continue to point others towards you, and just continue to do all things for your glory. So I just thank you for that, and I pray that we all take it to heart and go out and love on others as well. In your name I pray. Amen.